Hello everyone, and thank you for coming. My name is Kristinn Schram. I'm a lecturer here in folkloristics and ethnology at the University of Iceland, and have been doing research and work on the culture, identity, and policy of the Arctic or the North, and which is probably why I was asked to conduct this discussion, which is on one of the focus points of the RIFF festival, the Arctic. I've had the chance to see most of the films that roughly fall under this vast category, including feature-length films, short films, and documentaries, such as Kasha's Enchanted Forest, Sami Blood, Sealers, or De Siste Selfangere, One Last Hunt, Under the Arctic Sky, which follows 6 surfers on an adventure to the west of Iceland, Heidi Gurilov, a short documentary on a Skoldsami craftsmaker who has already, as an adult, gotten a chance to learn the language and culture of her family. Great Northern Mountain, which follows a old woman who grew up in the mountains of Lapland but has denied her older identity as a Sami and is put in touch with that dramatically. Under Two Skies, film director Suvi is a young Sami woman living in Helsinki, but has a longing to go back to her ancestral north, where she wants to have her child and raise in a northern identity. Also, My Father from Sirius, a very intimate portrait of a son's resolution to engage with his father's worldview, belief system, which is alternative to his environment. And Euthanizer, a film about a mechanic who euthanizes ailing pets and doesn't treat their owners with quite the same gentleness, shall we say. And we're very lucky to have the director and producer of My Father from Sirius and the producer from Euthanizer here with us today. We're also joined by writer Andri Snær Magnason, and who's also a filmmaker, by the way, and Sumarliði Ísleifsson, historian and professor at the Applied Media Studies, is the English translation? Applied Studies of Culture and Communication here at the University of Iceland. So please, if you could step up here to the tables and we'll get a bit of a discussion going. Sumarliði, if you will, ef þú bara, já, það ekki bara, þá get ég verið svona, held ég. So that is Einari Paakkanen to your left, Elina Pohjola, and Jani Persa, sorry, Andri Snær Magnason, which you know, and Sumarliði Ísleifsson. So I'd like to stress that when we speak about the Arctic, I would like to have a broad definition. Of course, we can define it in various ways, geographically, in its most strictest sense, north of the 66 degree. We can define it from the flora and fauna that combines it, but also the many cultures throughout the Arctic and subarctic, in some form indigenous, rural, urban, but really defined by its cultural diversity. But I would like you to use whatever definition sits best with you and your body of work and your orientation towards the Arctic. Although we might offer a few perspectives, some points of discussion on this sort of interconnected area, but which is also increasingly connected to the rest of the world through the effects of climate change. Throughout the Cold War, it had a specific position in the relations of peoples as a place where the superpowers could actually to some form meet, where scientific research could take place, and has often been exempt from the heat that engulfs the rest of the world. But today it is a hotbed due to climate change and melting ice and the mobility of people. So there's a lot of attention on the Arctic today. So those are some points that we could come into later. But as a group of writers and academics and filmmakers coming to this topic from different positions and experience, I think I'd like to ask you sort of what is your orientation towards the Arctic or towards the North in some general sense, and how that perhaps enters into your body of work. And shall we start maybe with Elina and Einari?
Oh, I should start. Well, yes, I'm originally from a small town from central Finland, there are some hundreds of kilometers to the actual polar Arctic Circle, so that's probably the closest to Arctic that I get, even though I'm from a small town, and it can be quite Arctic and at this atmosphere at times. And of course the North, for me, it shows that coming from a small town, we are kind of isolated at some point. And which you can see in my film is that these family relationships, it's really difficult to talk about emotions with your parents, and this I have noticed with many of my friends. I don't know, is it really distinct for Finnish culture? I would argue that Swedish people do it much better than Finnish people talking about emotions. I don't know about Iceland. Like it's a really strange sensation that that you are not able to really interact with your parents other than this everyday sense that, you know, what should we eat, and while I started to do my movie, I needed to give myself this really different role as a director to engage these questions, because without making a film about me and my father, I would have never had the courage to start asking questions about my father. So suddenly, when there's a camera crew and I have this double role as a son and then as a director, I suddenly have an ability to start asking questions. So that's for one answer, what's North for me.
And then what's North for me? My last name is Pohjola, and it actually means the North. So my production company is called Pohjola Filmi. It means the North Film. Of course, it's not internationally working out very well, since nobody speaks Finnish and knows that Pohjola means the North. But that's kind of the slogan of the company, is also warm movies from a cold land. And I think somehow this Northness is in everything I do all the time, and it interests me a lot, even though I'm not from the Arctic. Maybe I'm jealous for those people who are from even more north than I am. Helsinki is not very north, but there is something in the north that really interests me a lot, and I think it's a lot about the tempo and the people, just like Einari explained, how people are interacting with each other and how we are, and also it means what kind of stories do I want to tell from the north, and the warmth has to be there every time. Like My Father from Sirius, I don't know if you have seen it, but it was extremely important for us all the time that even though it's an intimate story, it's a family story about quite difficult subjects as well, it has to be a certain tone, the way we look at the people. It has to be a warm film, and it turned out to be a warm film. That's what North means for me.
And I would like to add one more thing, that we do have the same emotions as Americans as another extreme, or Italians, but we just don't really show it, or are unable to show it. Like there's this kind of a climax moment in my movie, in which I, just a short version of my father, when I was 12, he found aliens and UFOs, and he's still in contact every day in his life with the other invisible world, and that's how I grew up. And then at some point I started to have doubts, and then it was the most difficult moment for my life to confront my father and tell him that I don't really believe his world anymore. And we shot this scene, and then we showed it to, we were pitching the film, and we had a one-on-one meeting with the television producer from Holland, and then she said that there's no emotion in this scene. And then, the Finnish television guy said that, yes, I mean, this is the best you can come up with in Finland. Just people talking to each other in a most crucial moment in their life, but they are just like this talking about it. And that's the best we can do.
Andri, do you want to address that sort of question, how the North, how you're oriented towards the North in your work, both as a writer and filmmaker and activist, I suppose?
Yes, I am, I have a farm, or my family has a farm, which is like 2 kilometers under the Arctic Circle. Actually, once I found a message in a bottle lying on the Arctic Circle, where you can see it like as a line in the grass. There was a message in a bottle there, and we actually found a football there also from Norway. So and we would heat our house with driftwood from Siberia. So kind of, even though you were at the most remote place, you would find the interconnectedness, and we would wear helmets with kind of Latin names on them, Christopher or something, which would drift to the shore, and we found out that the Filipinos, they have Latin names. And these were helmets from Filipino sailors on cruise ships. Yeah, so we were on this, we would spend every summer kind of on this most remote place. And in my current work, I'm kind of, and you would, like I said, you would find also these connections, like through the Arctic terns that would fly from the South Pole almost to the North Pole. And sometimes as a kid I would worry, like, what if something happened in the South Pole? In South Africa or something, and suddenly they just would not come back one summer. I often had these kind of thoughts. So in my current work, I'm kind of trying to understand the concept of time versus our lives versus glaciers. My grandparents, they went on a honeymoon on Europe's biggest glacier in 1956, which was like a 4-week research trip to measure the snow depth of the glacier. And at the time when they were traveling over the glacier, it was in context with kind of geological time. That is, it was like the mountains, the clouds, the beach. It was a firm entity. It was something that had always been there, at least according to human time, and something that would always be there. But now, because of these measurements that started in '56, and have been annually since, and they apply that to the global warming expectations, this glacier will vanish within the time of somebody born today, becoming as old as my grandmother. That is, the glaciers have left geological speed and they're moving on human speed. So the North is undergoing changes that are the greatest in 10,000 years. So actually nobody has the memory of anything like this. So we see the nature has left geological speed and changes in human speed, while our kind of human reactions, that is the global reactions, the industry, the politics, is reacting to this in geological speed. That is, we are going to meet after 5 years to plan the discussion after 10 years of how we should prepare for this. And in a strange way, our metaphor for time, that is, so we know that Greenland will will rise, that is the sea level of the world, that is Greenland will spread across the planet. About 1 meter of Greenland will reach everybody's beach all over the world. And that will happen, we know it will happen in the next 100 years. But in a strange way, we don't identify with the future in a personal way. That is, we don't feel we are personally connected to the year 2100. So that is a project that I'm working on. I'm trying to have an intimate personal connection with the year 2100 through my grandmother's through my grandmother's trip on the glacier in '56.
So from glaciers and the Arctic Sea back to the boreal forests of Finland.
Yeah, well, I was thinking that I would say to this question that for me Arctic means basically north, because, and that's just because like I'm from Helsinki, our company is based in Helsinki. We've done like the Euthanizer third feature film we've done, then we've done 2 TV series and actually 17 short films. One is played here too. And I'd say that we have been filming only like, I think the remotest area from Helsinki is Sysmä, that's like 150 kilometers. So basically we've been running around like basically in Helsinki, let's say so. But then like what's the relationship for it, like in the body of my work? Like quite soon we will have like a French-Finnish co-production which we will be filming in Lapland. And this is actually a pretty funny story. I know the area pretty well because like also like my family has a, well it's actually a, I don't know, it's camppa, like a big like abandoned cottage basically, like 1,158 kilometers from Helsinki. And I spent a lot of like time there, so I have like Lapis childhood friends who used to be, all of them used to be criminals. Nowadays they are like, nowadays they have travel agencies and hotels. So, but anyways, like, so I spent a lot of time there, especially when I was a kid. Nowadays I try to go there for a week when it's dark, basically, because I think that's cool, especially when you do not have to be there the whole time. So then we got the first script. It's a short content TV series, which basically the synopsis is that there's a Russian millionaire has built this huge gaming area underground in Lapland, and then there's a team coming to playing with the Finnish esports team, and in the middle of like training they understand that they are actually facing artificial intelligence, not humans, which is built by some kind of a Finnish scientist. That's more or less like the thing which we are supposed to be doing. But then we got the first like visual treatments and synopsis and script and so forth. So basically what the French people have been thinking that, you know, there's a little French village and you basically then you like put it in Lapland, you put it in like somewhere remotely around the Arctic Circle, and then there's a bakery, there's a lot of people, you know, running around that small city, and then there's a bar, and you know, that's that. But then wherever you got there, so whenever you like watch, there's a lot of snow and there's mountains and so forth. And well, then I was with my kids in our cottage, and then because I said that it's a little bit different when you go to a Lapis village, and then I was standing in the middle of the village which is called Raattama, like pretty near our cottage. Friday night, Friday 3 o'clock basically, so that, and it was a season that there should be a lot of tourists. And there was like 2 people walking in the village, so then I just like did like this, like 360, and sent them to France and said that, well, this is actually what it really looks like, that there's nobody, you know, and there's like, there might be a shop and a restaurant when you go to like a real Lapis village. And then the answer came that it's really beautiful, we totally have to rethink this. So, but basically we are still like doing it, but probably like what's the relationship between Arctic, that wherever you live in like Nordic countries, you basically, you think that you do not know anything about it, but actually you do, because that's what I think how it is.
Sumarliði, you've written extensively on the subject of the orientation of the North and the Arctic, so I'm almost hesitant to ask you, how do you approach the North?
The North it's a difficult term. It is so floating. If you would go downtown here and ask people, do you think you are you Arctic people? And I suppose that I think that the answer would mostly be in one way: no, we are not Arctic people. We are not part of the Arctic. We are part of a different world. We are part of a European civilization, and it is actually a question that people here have been dealing with for 1,000 years, because the outside views have been with outside views, I mean people that have been living outside Iceland and writing about Iceland, they have defined Iceland as part of this wild, uncivilized world that is not at all part of Europe, but at the same time, Icelandic scholars and others that have been writing about this subject, they have been denying all the time we are not part of this this foreign and strange world. And unfortunately, I did not see. I think I saw 4 of the short films, and I found it interesting. How these old ideas of the Arctic and the North, how they appear in these films. We can take this film, for example, I think the name is Under the Arctic Sky. It is, the subject, I mean, surfing is, of course, not the same as the adventures in the 19th century, but the attitude is completely the same. Iceland and the Arctic in general, it is often presented as a playground for people that come from the south, that come from the civilization to the wilderness in the north. Yeah.
Well, thank you all, and we'll get back to some of the more complicated themes also of your films and your works. But as it said on the tin, this discussion was supposed to be also between the audience and our guests here in the panel. And I see we have quite a lot of people from different areas, film directors, policymakers, students, and the like. So I'm going to open up the floor to any questions or comments from the audience. So please just raise a hand and grab my attention if you have any input. But while you're thinking about that, I'd like to come back to some of the themes of your films. Jani, in many ways, the issue of animal welfare and even gender are addressed in your film. Could you follow up on that a bit? Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, the only insane character there is actually a female. She's the only one who's not crazy, basically. Like everybody else is like totally crazy and assholes, basically, in the film. So that's about gender. But yeah, the film basically revolves around like animal rights and question of euthanasia, which we didn't even think about it. But yeah, they are pretty trendy, hard topics in discussions and so forth. But the real like a story for well, at least for me, is like how stupid like white middle-aged males are, especially the ones which have the principles, but because I think that they are the ones which are going to make the world burn. So basically the film is about that, but yeah, the theme revolves about animal rights and euthanasia. And well, that's if you think about North, North, if it's for me a synonym for Arctic, I think one really big thing which affects to I think all of our work is that we can basically do anything. I mean, you want to make a film about euthanasia, just like do it. There's no like barriers that you do not have to be afraid that can I say this and can I say that, and that's a privilege. Like it's a privilege also having a lot of space and water. I think that's as big privilege as that. There's like from our, basically like in euthanizer, I'd say that there are pretty many countries that we could have not made it, if you ask me. There's a pretty funny story about our previous work about that, because I was in some kind of a panel discussion about this. Like we did this comedy for teenagers, and then in one episode there's a new chef, like a cook, like who always when he talks, he drinks a cup of coffee and there's a finger like this in the bottom of the cup. And then I'm in a panel discussion and there was a producer from BBC and she kept on asking that, did you have any problems with the cup? And then I'm like, oh my God, again, these like English production terms that I don't understand anything. And then when she asked that like 3 times, and then I understood that she's actually asking about the finger in the bottom of the freaking coffee cup. And then I was like, what do you mean? And then like she said that you couldn't have not aired that in UK before 9 o'clock. And you know, the target group for the TV show was like from 11 to something. Yeah. So that's something that you do not even think if you are like from our countries, basically. It was just a finger, you know.
Yes, please, and can you introduce yourself briefly? I'll hand you the microphone.
My name is Randy Malamed. I come from Atlanta, Georgia, very, very far from the Arctic. But I wonder if any of you think that that Arctic films have some kind of an ethical obligation, perhaps, to tell stories about global warming, to tell, to make films that will be seen by the rest of the world, that will show us something, that will teach us something, that will confront the fact that you people live in the place that's at the front line. It seems, of global warming, and what can we learn, and how can we learn that from watching your films?
Does anyone want to take that one?
I can give a
Yes, please,
brief
Andri.
answer. I think the responsibility to make movies about climate change is for whole the planet, because it also affects, I don't know if you've seen them, I don't remember the name of the documentary, but the president of a small island in there. Yes, and their island is going to vanish in a few years, and he was pushing the United Nations article about that the emissions should be kept really low. So he's really affected, and he's not from the Arctic, far from it. So that's my answer.
Mm-hmm. I say yes. But then I think that what I just said about censorship and stuff like that. If we have a privilege that we can basically talk about anything, I think that that's also something that we should do. Tolerance, racism, and everything like that. Because there are so many countries where you get your ass kicked if you talk about subjects that are like a household subject for us. So basically, I think that there's also one thing. I'm not saying that we are not supposed to do films about climate change, but the film about climate change you can do wherever, and then you just travel to Arctic and ask, then people will tell you. So that's where at least I think.
Andri, as a writer, you've been dealing with environmental issues for quite some time.
Like I was saying in my introduction, I'm quite deep into those issues now, and basically these issues are so large, they're so obvious that it's kind of difficult not to deal with them. Because and I think throughout this century we will have our hands full with the effect of what is happening. So maybe you feel some kind of obligation, that is, if you can see that something is collapsing in front of your eyes. Actually, the collapsing of glaciers is actually not as dramatic as you see it in films. It's not as you always see these calving, breaking ice. It's more like a silent spring. It's just just goes slowly, and like spring, But it's like a super spring. It's like every year all the ice cover in Iceland melts. We lose all the highland ice and it goes to the ocean. So that happens every year. But now it's just happening on a much larger scale. It's just we're losing not only the highland ice, that is the winter ice, but the firm glaciers themselves are leaving as well. So that's possibly why we need metaphors, films, and different perspectives. Because I have been in panel with scientists, and they maybe they have a wall like this behind them, and they say, "Look at this scenario S24.37x3 plan on this scale here. Aren't you scared?" And people they don't really understand what, yes, the blue line, doesn't that make you scared? So I was in a panel with a scientist, like the head of research in Potsdam, and I really felt like I didn't have the authority to talk about climate change, because he was the scientist and I was just a person, and he should talk about climate change. But he said, I can give you the figures, I can give you the numbers, but I cannot interpret that. I don't have the permission, he said, to put that into different context. He can present it as a graph, but to put it into a mythological, political, personal, all these aspects, because as humans we understand stories better than graphs, and everything has been told us through mythology and stories, and that applies also to climate change. If we are supposed to understand it, it has to be through metaphor and stories.
Yeah, and the facts don't matter anymore, like
Facts don't matter.
Yeah.
Is there a hand?
I'm
Yes,
sure
Elina?
that the world can learn from films on the north and all the changes that are happening in the north. But when we are thinking of the problems of the communities in the north, all of these small towns, for example, here in Iceland or in Greenland or anywhere, they are just the same as the problems in all small communities. That the people are leaving. And they are maybe not leaving because of the climate change, they are leaving for other reasons. The young people, they see other possibilities and they want to have education and they just leave. I'm thinking of a small town in northeastern Greenland, founded in 1925, and I mean, the main problems there are not climate change. It is the young people that are leaving, and they don't have opportunities for studies and education in the small town. So there is no other choice.
Coming back to Andri's point of mythology and environment, Elina and Einari, it was very interesting to see your film also from the perspective of a folklorist or an ethnologist, to see how the spirit world in your father's belief system is in many ways infused with his surrounding nature. So even though he is communicating with light beings in other parts of the galaxy, he is always looking at the nature around him. He's looking at a track of a squirrel and of a hare, and he's studying the moss on the tree and so forth. And this, in many ways, reminds an Icelander of traditional beliefs in hidden people, in enchanted spots, and how often folklore can provide some protection for nature in the sort of micro sense, at least. So is there anything on that point that you would like to draw forth on the spirit world and natural environment? Was that something that you were aware while you were making the film?
Yeah, I would say that if you think about the traditional religions, I think they are starting to, in this era that we are living now, and people want to kind of fuse their own belief system, and the traditional religions, they don't really are able to connect with some people. And for my father, who used to read a lot of science fiction stories, and then he has been able to kind of create his own mythology and own system of belief, which is much more interesting than a book that was written long time ago. And for my father, well, he was a tax secretary all his life, and he was 50 years old when he found the aliens, like other people buy a motorcycle or get a younger wife, but my father, he found the aliens. Yes, nature is a big part of it. He describes it as his life until when he was 50 years old. It was gray line that he would see the pension and the death in the end of it. And then when he became enlightened, he said that it was like coming out of a cave into a forest, and first time he could hear the birds singing. So, yeah.
And maybe I could briefly continue also the previous question about what's the responsibility and what kind of topics we choose and how we tell the stories. I know it sounds maybe a little bit naive, but I do believe that films, because they are about emotions, so they can change the world. Why we want to make films? Because we want to tell some story, we want to make a change. Also, if I think about this film or the documentary film that was shown here a couple of years ago. It was called My Godfather, His Thai Bride and Me. That was a story about a Finnish guy who has a Thai wife, and his godson didn't believe that there's absolutely cannot be no true love. It's just paid love. And with that film, and also with this documentary, how I feel that as a producer, what I want to tell stories or what I want to change is to make people understand and see better. And it was, in that documentary, it was very important that how we portrayed the relationship, and that this godson, who was the main character, actually comes to the conclusion in the end that who am I to judge anyone's love, and who can say what love is real and what is not, and what is it my business at all, and what does it matter? And we got so many messages from couples like that, or people who have been thinking that my relative is married to a Thai woman and it can't be love. That I feel that there was an impact and there was a change. And with this film, how I want people to see Einari and his father, like to understand more and understand better. So it goes with the topic of climate changing. It goes with different kind of topics. We want to tell stories, and we have the responsibility to tell stories because we want to make a change and we want to give a new perspective. And it's difficult with only facts, so we luckily have the music and the editing. We can make the films, I think, more approachable than only a paper with A, B, Z blue line going up and down.
And also the belief for their own mythology is really embedded in the Finnish people. When in the 14th century Catholicism arrived to Finland, and they were more or less forcing people to go into the church and to listen to the ceremony. The bishop from Sweden was complaining that, yeah, sure, the Finns come to the church, but when they go home, they worship their own gods and forget everything that was taught. So it's somewhere really deep within us.
I'm sure there are some thoughts or comments in the audience. Would anybody like a chance to voice them? No?
It's a Finnish audience.
It's a Finnish audience. They're communicating with us telepathically. But similarly, they mentioned that a lot of the issues and problems of the Arctic have to do with small communities and remote communities. And of course, we know that very well here in Iceland, how the urban and rural divide is something that has a lot of effect on our lives, a lot of effect on policy, effect on how things are viewed and portrayed. The outsider urban's view of Iceland is perhaps quite different than those of its inhabitants, even in those most remote places. Is this an issue that you deal with in your work, whether it's your writing or the production of films, how to deal with the viewpoint of perhaps a cosmopolitan audience, the funds that are positioned in the centers of our respective countries? Is the rural-urban divide something that is of significance to you in your work?
I may try to answer. I think the most valuable export asset we have is weirdness, if you ask me, and that's something that has happened. That has sort of. I think people have realized that quite lately. I'd say that if you take 10 years ago, there was a couple of people who were weird and exported. And we have to export stuff because the countries are so small that if we make films only for these countries, certain kind of films simply do not have enough audience that you can make it. So basically I think that has something to do with also the division between rural and city. But because I think that that's something that makes the stuff pretty weird. Think about Finland, for example, because, the things are pretty similar in some sense in all of the country. But a few years ago, I think we were the first country that voted right-wing assholes to government. And a year after that, we were the first country who almost elected openly gay president. and it was like 1 year or like 2 years. And that's weird, if you ask me. That if you watch that from the like somebody point of view who's like not from the Nordic countries. In Nordic countries, you would just okay, yo, that happened. And yeah, and it's like when you live in a city. For example, euthanasia happens somewhere which is countryside, which basically it's filmed 50 kilometers from Helsinki again. But it's like something you can in that film, for example, you can see that there's it's something between industrialized and nature, where we sort of are revolving there, like old abandoned like fabrics and so forth. So yeah. I think you can see that in every work basically which you do, which somehow like reflect the locations more than superhero films.
I could say that the issue similarly was mentioning the loss of youth from the rural areas is of course a huge trauma for those people that are kind of feeling their culture being drained by the cities and the educational system. Often, of course, they are kind of colonized by an educational system that does not take their own specialities into the university level, but fisheries and farming, all that's just secondary. You should go to the university and learn international studies or something like. So often, like they don't really get an identity for their expertise. They're just maybe uneducated. But at the same time, they often have this identity as being, closest to nature. But at the same time, kind of sometimes presenting themselves as the noble savage or, the people that understand nature. But at the same time, quite often, they are the people that are selling off their nature, often for a very small price. So we're seeing like in the Westfjords now in Iceland, where actually a former noble savage has just sold his river to a Canadian investor, and is cashing out. That is, he's kind of the last on the line. He's on the end of the road. He's kind of cashing out. He's probably 70 something. So he's getting his pension by cashing out his nature and leaving. And we see that in many villages where, not only in Iceland, where kind of this desperation also when it comes to the negotiating table against the big companies. I just need somebody to paint the school, and I need 1 job or 2 jobs or 10 jobs. It can be a very low price for a mountain or nature. So we have in Greenland people that were ready to open a uranium mine. They were very ready to open up, to sell a mountain to Chinese investors close to Nuuk. And that was kind of in the hope for independence, that these corporations would give cash so they could become independent. And we also see that in the Amazon or in Canada, or where people are kind of, that should know their forest, they're selling off their backcountry for mining, drilling, shale gas or something. So the people you are kind of hoping should be at the front line of protecting the environment are very often those that are opening the gates for industry. So there's actually a beautiful kind of globalization story that is kind of sentence that is connected to Greenland, that is and kind of catches very well how interconnected the world is, that a virus in Africa prevented a mountain in Greenland from being shipped to China.
That's great.
That's a true story. So when Ebola spread in South Africa, no, in Angola, London Mining went bankrupt because of their investments there. So they could not take a mountain in Greenland and ship that to China. So a virus in Africa prevented mountain in Greenland from being shipped to China. But that was 1/3 of their independence dreams in Greenland, was that by selling the mountain they could buy themselves independence from Denmark.
It's maybe a bit difficult to think about all this without thinking of the outside views. I mean, without thinking about the demand. I mean, there is demand for the weirdness, for example, and we respond to that. And there is demand for noble savages all over the world, and of course we respond and we become noble savages. And I mean, there is a demand for sorcery in the north, and we open a sorcery museum in northwestern Iceland. So, I mean, I think we always need to have this dialogue in mind. I mean, if we do, it helps us to understand and define.
So there's a question here in the back from Run.
Hello, I'm Run from the Reykjavik Film Festival. I was just thinking because there is, you've been talking about, of course, there's an increased interest in the Nordic issues. And actually I was in May in Alaska and I met Einari there at a very nice art festival. And then we were also watching films and discussing the Aboriginals and how we have been treating those people, the Samis and so on. So there are many issues, of course, and most of them may be rather negative, at least with the environmental issues and also political aspects. But maybe because there is an increased interest and focus on the Arctic countries, then I just wanted to ask you about that a little bit. If maybe we can reflect our history and maybe use this opportunity to discuss a little bit how those people have been treated. And the short films in the program, they actually come from a small festival in Sweden, which is focused mainly on Sami issues, which I find quite interesting. But at least here in Iceland, there has not been a lot of discussion about those minorities, those people that actually were here before we came, and how they are treated, or have been treated at least.
May I?
Yes, please, Elina.
Quite often, I think that's exactly is the purpose of art, of literature and films. If we think about now in Finland, also came this Sami Blood film, where we finally these kind of films that we can tell what happened and admit that it wasn't right. So I think that that's one purpose of all the artists are. It's their responsibility to also tell that kind of stories and make them visible, because who else would or will start the discussion? And I think a film or a novel or theater play is a very good point where to start a political discussion, and also how to make a change. I think there's a lot of examples that there is a film or theater play and it actually makes a change also in the political level. I think that's one purpose of art.
So we have no indigenous people in Iceland. Whether there are theories of the Irish poppy here before us, that wouldn't fit the bill either. But of course we are part of a sort of North Atlantic dynamic and relations, and lack of relations often with our neighbors to the west. So Einari, would you like to say a few words a bit about our position here in the Northwest and our relations with Greenland, with the Danish kingdom and so forth, and how that relates to Arctic issues?
Since 1985, Iceland has not only been Nordic, it has been West Nordic. And what does West Nordic mean? It means that it is part of the same. It is defined as in the same category as the Faroe Islands and Greenland. The Faroe Islands, Greenland, and Iceland, they are defined as this West Nordic place, and I find it very interesting because until the last decades, there were prejudices against Greenland. There were very similar attitudes to Greenland from the Icelandic viewpoint as were in Denmark. I mean, they were considered as people that were on a lower stage than the Icelanders, and it is even possible to trace ideas that up to the 1970s that the Icelanders were to take over Greenland. We can see such kind of ideas in the up to the 1970s, but this has changed at least partly in the last 20, 30 years, and I think it is mainly interests. There were interests. The Icelandic state, it was in the interests of the Icelandic state to change the attitude to Greenland, and it maybe takes too much time to explain why, but part of the explanation is the end of the Cold War, and Iceland needed other friends that they had traditionally for around 50 years or so. So, very briefly, the old prejudices have at least partly changed, and the collaboration between Iceland and Greenland is now increasing a lot.
Iceland had throughout the 20th century was struggling to be a mid-European cultural nation. That is, that we wanted to have opera singers, symphony orchestra. We wanted to be able to do everything that the high culture in Europe was doing.
Our music hall is a wonderful example, I think, on how people here have been thinking on these matters. I mean, it does not fit. It is too big.
So we actually kind of erased our kind of folklore heritage, while the Faroese, they continued to dance and do all their medieval stuff. But we were really under the rush to erase all those kind of rural, ancient traces that we still had in our culture. When British soldiers laughed at the reamer playing in the radio, we started to kind of hide that tradition as well. And one of that was to get further from Greenland. That is because we were being mixed up with Greenland and snow houses. And one of that part of the identity creating was being less Greenlandic and being absolutely not Greenlandic, you know. So also through the independence movement. So the first time I think I spoke actually to a Greenlander, which is just 1 hour away, I think I was 20 something when I met my first Greenlander. Maybe 24 when I saw a group of young Greenlanders that is not drunken sailors downtown, but like a Greenlander that was my age and had something in common with me. And when I first went to Greenland, I had to fly through Denmark. So 24 hours after I had left home, my airplane was over Iceland. So it would have been easier in 1990 or around 2000 to have a girlfriend, a business partner, a relative in Kenya than in Greenland, because it only took like 10 hours to get to Kenya, but it took 24 hours to go to Greenland. And and of course our connections are all based on air travel and that. So those are the real length between countries. So now Greenland has come closer to us physically as well. So, and I think our identity, we're open for. I don't think this complex is as strong as it was in the.
The thing is maybe that, I mean, the Icelanders did have their mirror in Greenland, and the Greenlanders as the Norwegians and Danes, they had their mirrors in the Sami lands. I mean, the Icelanders had their savages in Greenland, but the Scandinavian countries had their other in the high north in Scandinavia.
But I think it's like, I think to have identity you need self-esteem, and then, you know, all the Nordic countries, if you do not count Swedes, who have Abba, like, you know, you just have to think that your country is cool, and to think that your country is cool, you need somebody that has succeeded in something that you think is cool. It's actually, this is like total oversimplification, but that's how it goes if you really think about it. Like, and I think that the same thing nowadays in Finland, we think Finland is cool. You know, we didn't do it, like back in 80s, for example. Then I was at least thinking that I want to move out of this fucking country as soon as possible. But it was about the thing that I was thinking that it's not cool, because like Kaurismäki had just started like his success and so forth. There was basically nothing, not in music, not in art, which you do, like, you know, Alvar Aalto. How boring can you be? You are thinking like when you are 18 or 19 or something like that. So I think that has probably happened also here. At least it has happened in Finland.
But I would say that it's important to ask that what is it to be a Finnish? Yeah. Because right now, talking about mythologies, it's been really enforced, mainly because of this populistic party, that we track from the past these symbols of being Finnish. From the late 19th century, we had a Romanticism movement that tried to, you know, create the identity of what is the identity of Finland. Some paintings and our mythological past with wizards and druids from the nature. And right now the populistic party is using these symbols and saying that, you know, we should keep Finland as Finland and say no to immigrants. And so it's
the symbols should have like stolen back for like real people and not for them.
And I have a fear. We have a new project called Cross Country, where we are following a family of mother and 3 children and their process of becoming Finnish. And I mean, the moment that we started to do the film is, I'm from a small town, and then now that we have a lot of immigrants coming, my friends who have stayed there, I was shocked to hear their opinions about immigrants, that, you know, they come here and soon we have ISIS and all this stuff. So, I mean, and they are so afraid because there are a lot of unemployed youth in my hometown. And then if you have immigrants who don't speak the language coming there to compete for the same jobs, that the jobs are not even I mean, the local people can't get jobs. Of course, it's a difficult situation, but I still think we need to help people. But so I want to make this movie as an answer to my friends, to show that, you know, these are people just like us, and we have more in common than we have things that are not common.
But that's actually cool, like, because now, you know, it's art, film is reacting to the like world which is around. Our next film is called Nimby. It's a comedy about tolerance among intolerant people, basically. So.
Very interesting avenue of discussion. I've been neglecting our audience though, and I have a couple of comments, starting with our senior Arctic official, Árni.
Thank you. My name is Árni Thor from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I would like to go back to this discussion about perception and identity, which I believe is quite important. And similarly, you said at the outset that I mean, if people in Iceland were asked whether they were Arctic people, they would probably say no. But isn't it so that identity changes over time? I mean, 30 years ago, I think it's also about how do you sort of translate. I must admit that my Finnish is quite limited yet. But if you translate into Icelandic, I mean Arctic, if you use the word Norðurslóðir, for instance, 30 years ago you would not see this word Norðurslóðir in Icelandic discussion or media or whatever, whereas today it's quite common. And if you ask people in Iceland, are you sort of, are your country a Arctic country or Norðurslóðaríki, they would probably say yes. If you ask if it is a polar region or polar country, they would probably say no. So it's also about how do the perception, how do you translate, what term do you use, and also how the identity can change over time, which I think is also something you must take into account.
Yeah, can I reply? I think you are absolutely right. If we think about how things are in Finland and how we used to think about Sami people living in Lapland or the Lappish people in general, and when we go 20 or 40 or 60 years behind, and it wasn't cool and they weren't treated very well. But nowadays it's cool. If someone is like real Sami, like wow, I wish I would be one. And I think that can change over time, and luckily it has changed now over time this way, but I think that's absolutely true. And also happening in Finland.
Yes, I think you are quite right. I mean, it depends on how you are presenting this idea. I mean, it is difficult to explain in English because we somehow don't have these exactly these same terms as but this term that you mentioned, Norðurslóðir, it is not exactly the same as the Arctic. I would think, but you are quite right that and it is exactly what has happened in these last 30 years, that the idea on the high north has changed a lot. And I mean, it is of course cool, but it has become cool.
But we can take like other angles around Iceland. Like after we expanded the fishing territories of Iceland, Iceland actually became that is the mass that belongs to us. We're more like a cucumber than a land. That is, we're only 13% land, but the rest is water. And the ocean has a very little part of our identity. It's all about mountains and things, but like ocean identity is very weak. So we almost don't see us as a ocean nation. No. Even though we catch 1% of the fish in the world, that's kind of the other. Those are fishermen. Those are not like it's privatized in a way. It's not an open space. So actually the marine life and all that has very little to do with our own identity also. So there are lots of unclaimed territories in terms of identity that we can.
So what will happen?
That's actually, yeah.
How will it change in the future?
And that's actually pretty weird because that's cool.
What do you think will happen with that part of identity?
I think, you know, if you are raised, very few nations in the world actually have so much water, you know, in their within their territories, and you know, France, Finland, they don't have so much water. So actually, Iceland has a responsibility towards ocean health and all those things. So I think, you know, we should raise our children much closer to this identity as well.
Föðurland þitt hált hafið, or your fatherland is half sea, as the old saying goes. But we have a final comment from an Arctic researcher here in the audience.
Hi, my name is Katla. I'm interested in the Arctic as a social and cultural construction. And I just want to begin with saying thank you to you all. It's been a very interesting talk. A lot of questions and ideas that get into your head during your discussion. But I've been thinking a little bit about this Arcticness as a social and cultural construction in a way, and how it is, of course, being visualized through films. And I'm also thinking about it as the sort of exclusion and inclusion dynamics that are included within the construction. Like, I can't remember the name, but you were talking a little bit about the immigrant communities and how they are sort of being portrayed within films that are defined as Arctic. So it got me to think a little bit about the themes and maybe people as well that is being sort of like excluded within this framework of the Arctic. If you could maybe elaborate a little bit about that. What would be the themes that are sort of not included within the framework?
Wow, really nice name, Katla, from the Astrid Lindgren's the book, The Dragon. It's my favorite book. Yeah, I don't know if I can answer to that, but I had an idea earlier that I'm really afraid that, I don't know, Finnish society, there's always been a need to hate a minority, if it's the Romani people or Sami people. And now with the immigrants coming in and Sami people regarded as cool, then I'm afraid that new immigrants will become the Sami people of the past. Right? That, it's a really difficult situation, and I don't know how can they, what's their identity going to be in the future in this sense. But yeah, I don't know if I answered.
I think the problem is that it's really easy to be tolerant if something is far away, that when it gets closer it's like really hard. And now it's getting closer, and that's actually what our next film is about. But that's like, I think in a way that's the problem, what I think all the Nordic countries are facing. But on the other hand, it's like what I do think, that we have a lot of space and water. It's like we have had that like always, so please come in if you ask me. And also, like, if you really think about it, like if you expand it like so that you say Europe, I think we've been sort of like stealing from the world quite many hundreds of years, if you ask me. So, you know, please come in. We have water. There's a lot of space. It's a little bit cold country, but.
And a declining population.
Yes,
there's
true.
More people leaving than coming.
We're declining.
Yeah, we are.
So we've covered a wide range of topics, and for me it's been a very interesting discussion. And I'd like to thank the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for their support, and thank you everyone for coming and taking part here And a special thanks to your very interesting perspectives on this subject, Einari, Elina, Andri, Jani, and Sumarliði. Thanks so much, and I encourage you to see the films. I know Euthanizer is being screened at 7 today.
Yeah, today at I think it was 7:30.
Right, and you'll be able to catch My Father from Sirius
Tomorrow at 7:45 in the evening.
Right. So thank you so much, and thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.